It was just after midnight on New Year's night when Ethan stepped out of his apartment building and felt the cold hit his face like a quiet truth he had been avoiding all evening. The city of Toronto still glowing behind him with leftover fireworks and fading laughter, yet the street he stood on felt empty, almost forgotten, and that contrast made his chest feel heavy in a way he couldn't explain. Because only an hour ago he had been at a crowded party filled with familiar faces, cheap champagne, loud music, and forced smiles, but he had felt invisible there, like a guest in his own life, counting down to a new year he didn't believe in, surrounded by people who were celebrating futures he couldn't picture for himself. And when the countdown ended and everyone hugged and kissed and shouted hopeful promises into the air, Ethan had quietly slipped on his coat and left without anyone noticing, walking down the stairs with a strange calm, as if he already knew the night wasn't meant to be spent indoors pretending everything was fine. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, the kind that made thoughts clearer, and as he stood there, hands deep in his pockets, he checked his phone out of habit more than hope, scrolling past photos from earlier years when New Year's had meant something different, when Lily had been beside him, laughing too loudly, holding his arm too tightly, always saying that winter made everything feel more honest, and that memory alone made his throat tighten, because Lily had left 3 months ago with careful words and gentle apologies, saying she needed space, saying she didn't know who she was anymore, saying she loved him but not enough to stay, and Ethan had nodded and said he understood even though he didn't, because understanding felt like the mature thing to do, and now here he was on the first night of a new year, realizing that being mature didn't stop the loneliness from settling in. The streetlight above him flickered, snowflakes drifting down slowly as if the city itself was tired, and without fully thinking it through, Ethan pulled out his phone again, opened the taxi app, and typed a request that surprised even him, not an address, not a destination, but a simple sentence asking to go somewhere covered in snow, somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't remind him of unfinished conversations and empty apartments, and for a moment he considered deleting it, telling himself it was pointless, but then he hit confirm, feeling a small rush of relief as if the decision itself mattered more than where he would end up. The wait was short, and when a taxi pulled up, its headlights cutting through the falling snow, Ethan felt a strange sense of finality, like crossing an invisible line, and he hesitated only a second before opening the door and getting in, greeted by the soft hum of the engine and the faint smell of coffee, and the driver, a woman with tired eyes but a calm expression, glanced back at him with a look that wasn't curious or rushed, just present, asking where he was headed, and Ethan surprised himself again by answering honestly, telling her he didn't want to be anywhere specific, that he just needed to leave. And instead of laughing or questioning him, she studied his face for a moment and nodded, saying it had been that kind of night for a lot of people, which made something loosen in his chest because he hadn't realized how badly he needed to feel understood, even by a stranger. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, the city lights sliding past the windows, Ethan leaned back and let the movement carry him, noticing how quiet it suddenly felt compared to the noise inside his head, and with each block they passed, he felt like he was shedding pieces of the night he didn't want to carry into the new year, the forced smiles, the polite conversations, the questions about plans and resolutions he didn't have answers for, and he watched the buildings grow smaller, the streets less crowded, snow beginning to stick to the road, and he thought about how Lily used to love drives like this, how she would point out the way the snow softened everything, how she said it made the world feel forgiving, and that memory hurt, but not sharply, more like a dull ache he was learning to live with. And as the taxi moved forward into the quiet, Ethan realized that this simple choice, this one unplanned ride into the cold, was the first thing he had done all night that felt honest, and for the first time since the year had changed, he felt like he was finally breathing. The taxi moved steadily away from the city, tires brushing over roads that were slowly disappearing under fresh snow, and Ethan watched the bright lights fade into softer shadows, feeling as if the night was peeling layers off him one by one, leaving him exposed but lighter, and inside the car the warmth wrapped around him while the outside world turned quiet and white, a silence that felt earned, not empty, and the driver finally spoke, her voice calm and even, introducing herself as Claire, not asking questions that felt sharp or curious, just enough to let the air between them feel human, and Ethan replied without effort, surprised by how easy it was to talk when no one expected anything from him, and as the road stretched on, Claire mentioned how New Year's nights always carried strange energy, how people expected one moment to fix months of confusion, and Ethan let out a soft laugh because it was exactly what he had been feeling without knowing how to name it, and he told her he hadn't planned to leave the party early, that he had tried to stay, tried to smile, but every cheer around him felt like noise pressing against a bruise, and Claire nodded slowly, keeping her eyes on the road, saying some nights weren't meant for crowds, and that simple sentence stayed with him because it felt like permission. Snow began to fall harder as they drove north, thick flakes drifting past the windshield, and Ethan felt a familiar pull in his chest, memories surfacing. Without warning, like the first winter he had spent with Lily, when they had driven out of the city late one night just to watch snow fall in silence, when she had reached for his hand and said she liked who she was when the world slowed down, and remembering that made his jaw tighten, but instead of pushing it away, he let the memory sit there, because pretending it didn't matter had only made things worse, and when Claire gently asked if someone was on his mind, Ethan didn't dodge the question, saying Lily's name out loud for the first time that night, admitting they had planned this year together, that they had talked about moving, about starting fresh, and that she had left instead, not angrily, not dramatically, but with quiet sadness that lingered longer than any argument could have, and as he spoke, the words came faster, not rushed but honest, explaining how she said she needed to find herself, how he had wanted to be supportive, how he told her he understood even though part of him had hoped she would change her mind, and Claire listened without interrupting, without offering quick advice, only saying that sometimes people didn't leave because love was gone, but because fear made staying feel heavier than leaving. And that idea struck Ethan deeply because it gave shape to something he had been circling for months, and the road narrowed as trees lined both sides, branches heavy with snow, and the world outside looked untouched, clean, like it had never known heartbreak at all, and the quiet inside the taxi grew comfortable, broken only by the soft sound of tires against snow and the heater humming low, and Ethan realized how rare it was to sit with someone without pretending, without explaining himself carefully, without worrying about being strong or impressive, and he felt a gentle gratitude toward Claire, not as a savior or guide, but as a witness to a moment he hadn't known he needed to share. The taxi passed small houses with dark windows, the kind of places where families slept peacefully, and Ethan wondered how many people inside those homes were also carrying things they didn't talk about, and he thought about Lily again, about the last night they spent together, how she had rested her head on his shoulder and said nothing, how he had known something was ending even before she said the words, and the snow outside felt like it was absorbing those memories, taking the sharp edges off them, and as they drove deeper into the quiet, Ethan noticed his breathing slow, his thoughts no longer racing, and for the first time since she left, he wasn't replaying conversations or imagining different endings, he was simply there, moving forward through a dark road softened by snow, and Claire broke the silence once more, saying they were nearing a lake she liked to stop by on nights like this, a place that reminded her that stillness wasn't the same as being stuck, and Ethan felt a small spark of curiosity, a pull toward whatever waited ahead, not because he expected answers, but because the idea of standing somewhere quiet felt right. And as the taxi continued, snow falling thicker, city fully behind them, Ethan understood that this ride was no longer about escaping pain, but about learning how to carry it without letting it define the start of his year, and that realization settled in him gently, like snow finally sticking to the ground. The taxi slowed as the road curved toward a frozen lake hidden between tall pine trees, the headlights washing over snow that looked untouched, smooth, and endless, and when Claire stopped the car and turned off the engine, the sudden quiet felt deep enough to hear his own thoughts, and Ethan sat still for a second, unsure why his chest felt tight again, not with pain this time but with something close to respect for the moment, because the place felt like it existed outside time, away from calendars, parties, and expectations, and Claire told him softly that this was where she usually stopped when the night felt too loud, and Ethan nodded, opening the door and stepping out into the cold, the snow crunching under his boots, the air sharp and clean as if it was cutting through everything false he had been carrying, and he stood there breathing slowly, watching the lake stretch out before him, frozen solid and glowing under the moonlight, and he realized how small his problems felt in that wide silence, not unimportant, but finally in proportion. He walked a few steps forward, hands deep in his coat pockets, feeling the cold reach his skin, and memories came fast now. Not in a heavy way but like scenes passing by, Lily smiling in winter light, Lily brushing snow from his hair, Lily saying she loved quiet places because they didn't ask questions, and instead of breaking him, those memories softened him. Because standing there made him understand that love didn't disappear just because people changed direction, it stayed, shaped differently, and that thought surprised him with its calm. Behind him, Claire stepped out of the taxi but kept her distance, giving him space without leaving, and he appreciated that more than words, because he didn't need advice or comfort, just the freedom to feel without being watched too closely. And as the wind moved through the trees, Ethan pulled out his phone, the screen bright against the dark. Lily's name already there like it had been waiting, and his thumb hovered as doubt crept in, reminding him of unsent messages, of nights he had stopped himself from reaching out, afraid of reopening wounds, afraid of being ignored, afraid of hoping again. But something about this place, this pause in the world, made honesty feel less dangerous, and instead of writing questions or promises, he typed words that felt complete, thanking her for the years they shared, for the laughter, for the winters, for the love that had shaped him, telling her he didn't regret what they had, and that he hoped she was finding what she was looking for. And when he sent it, there was no rush of fear, only relief, like setting something down after carrying it too long. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked out at the lake again, realizing that closure didn't always come from answers, sometimes it came from choosing peace, and Claire's voice reached him gently, saying he didn't look as heavy as when he got into the car, and he smiled without turning around, admitting that he felt clearer, not fixed, but present, and she told him that was enough for one night, and they stood there quietly, two strangers sharing the calm without needing to define it, the snow continuing to fall, covering their footprints almost as soon as they made them, and that detail struck Ethan deeply, how quickly the world moved on without erasing what had been there, and he understood that his story wasn't ending, it was simply changing shape. After a while, Claire returned to the driver's seat, leaving the door open for him if he wanted warmth, but Ethan stayed outside a little longer, letting the cold ground him, letting the silence settle, and when he finally turned back, she told him she would head back soon, that he could stay as long as he liked, and before leaving, she said something that stayed with him, that starting over didn't always mean walking alone, sometimes it just meant walking honestly, and with that, she drove away slowly, the red lights fading into the snow, leaving Ethan standing by the frozen lake, alone but not lonely, aware that the night had given him something rare, not answers, not miracles, but the quiet strength to face whatever came next. And as the wind moved across the ice and the snow kept falling, Ethan felt ready to step forward into the rest of the year, carrying his past with care instead of regret. Morning arrived quietly, not with alarms or noise, but with pale light spreading across the frozen lake, and Ethan opened his eyes feeling cold but steady, as if the night had pressed a reset button inside him, and he sat up slowly, brushing snow from his coat, looking around at the world now painted in soft blues and whites, the trees standing still, the sky clear, everything calm in a way that felt earned, not borrowed, and for a moment he simply breathed, noticing how different his chest felt compared to the night before, lighter, not because the past had disappeared, but because it no longer felt like it was chasing him. And as he stood and stretched his stiff legs, memories of the taxi ride, of Claire's quiet presence, of the lake under moonlight came back to him in pieces, fitting together like a story that finally made sense. He walked along the edge of the lake, boots crunching over snow, thinking about how he had always rushed his life, his work, his relationships, believing that moving fast meant moving forward. And yet the stillness of this place had given him more clarity in one night than months of noise ever had, and that realization stayed with him as he checked his phone, expecting nothing, but seeing a new message waiting, Lily's name lighting up the screen in a way that made his heart pause instead of race, and he hesitated before opening it, not from fear this time, but from respect for whatever it contained, and when he finally read her words, they felt gentle and honest, not dramatic, not rushed. She said she had received his message just as snow began falling outside her apartment in Seattle, that she had stood by her window for a long time thinking about him, about them, about how she had been running from feelings she didn't know how to carry, and she said she missed him, not in a desperate way, but in a real one, and that space hadn't erased what they shared, it had only made her understand it more clearly. Ethan sat down on a fallen log, reading her message again, feeling warmth spread through him that wasn't excitement or relief, but recognition. Because this wasn't a promise or a reunion, it was honesty meeting honesty, and that felt stronger than any rushed ending or dramatic return. And he typed back slowly, choosing his words with care, telling her he was glad she reached out. That he didn't expect answers right now, that he was learning to stand on his own without closing his heart, and that whatever came next, he wanted it to be real, not forced by fear of being alone. And when he sent it, he felt complete in a way that didn't depend on her reply. The sun climbed higher, light reflecting off the ice, and Ethan began the walk back toward the road, noticing how his steps felt steadier, his thoughts clearer, and as he reached the spot where the taxi had dropped him off, he imagined Claire driving somewhere else, carrying another quiet story in the back seat, offering the same calm without asking for anything in return. And he felt grateful for people who crossed our paths briefly but left lasting marks. And as a car passed on the distant road, Ethan realized he was ready to return to the city, not as someone escaping, but as someone choosing. And when he finally made it back to his apartment later that day, the space felt different, not empty but open, sunlight filling rooms that had felt heavy before. And he cleaned, made coffee, sat by the window watching snow fall gently over familiar streets, and instead of feeling trapped by memories, he felt connected to them, understanding now that love didn't fail just because it changed form, and that heartbreak wasn't a sign of weakness, but proof that he had lived fully. And as the day moved on, Ethan didn't rush to make plans or resolutions. He simply let the new year unfold naturally, knowing that somewhere across the continent Lily was doing the same, and that whether their paths crossed again or not, the night he called a taxi and asked to go somewhere covered in snow had given him something lasting, a quiet confidence, a steady heart, and the understanding that sometimes the most important journeys don't take you to a new place, but back to yourself.